This presentation is about how I rationalize and implement the integration of early cereal habitats with restoration of old growth. I'll explain in more detail later, but early cereal habitat management is entwined with old growth management because about 97% of my district is managed for older forest. And I personally think early cereal habitats are important aspects of old growth. When I say early cereal in this presentation, I mean grasses, forbs, shrubs, and hardwoods. I definitely don't mean conifers. My approach involves goals and developing treatments to try to reach these goals. I think my job as a district wildlife biologist is more than just keeping the boss out of trouble. It's about finding ways to meet Forest Service goals for wildlife while helping the district meet all of its other goals. So, oops, I think I went too far. So to connect the wildlife work to the Forest Service mission, I start with the mission, which is to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. And we maintain healthy ecosystems by supporting recovery of threatened or endangered species and maintaining at least viable populations of all native and desired non-native species. These are the, whoops, I need to stop something here. No, I'm trying to kill the automatic timing. And I think I just did that. Because it's running on its own. So the supporting recovery of threatened and endangered species and maintaining at least species viability, those are the same laws that led us to the Northwest Forest Plan. And these are the same laws that the Forest Service needs to continue embracing and adapting its management as time and science reveals the need to change. Okay, so to maintain healthy ecosystems, we need to maintain a variety of habitats which support a variety of species. The Forest Service cannot meet its legal obligations to the American people if it does not maintain a variety of habitats across the landscape. Improvement of ecosystems. This is an important statement for me and how I approach my job. I assume the best way to manage a healthy ecosystem is to use the reference condition of natural range of variability. This slide compares natural range of variability for cereal stages with existing cereal stages in a typical watershed. I've highlighted in red the two that are the most below historic conditions. Basically, the natural range of variability for early cereal was 12 to 29%. Subtract 4 from those two, and you end up with 8 to 25% less than we historically had. And old growth's in a lot worse shape. That's 25 to 48% less than we had historically. So ecosystem health is not what it should be on my district. There's hardly any old growth forest. Mature forest is extremely fragmented. I don't know how much you guys can see this up here, but this is mature forest. The rest is younger. We have 4, I guess maybe 5 species now, huh, John, that are listed on our district because of these conditions. We got too many dense monoculture conifer stands. Native grasslands are all but extinct on the Oregon Coast Range, I think. and our streams lack complexity. The species affected by low amounts of old growth or early xeral forest are marbled murrelet and spotted owls are associated with old growth, and the Oregon silver spot butterfly is associated with native coastal meadows. Other declining species, I think every one of these have been mentioned today that are associated with early xeral habitats. Clearly, there's a need for more old growth in early xeral forest, but what can I do about that? I can propose projects, but I need more than general goals. I need measurable stand scale goals that we can use to do something about it. It's been mentioned more than once today, but on the Oregon coast, what grows has to do with what gets the light. There's not much moisture limiting. There's not much temperature limiting going on. And these stand scale goals need to be consistent with current land allocations. So I don't know how familiar everybody is with the Northwest Forest Plan, but basically this is showing in purple is Lake Successional Reserve, green is matrix. The blue along the west side is, I think it's congressionally withdrawn. It's the Oregon Dunes National Recreation Area. And this area right in here is the largest piece of matrix on the district. And the next slide shows what that looks like when you put the riparian reserves on top of it. And that pretty much sums up why the Siuslaw National Forest isn't trying to go after optimum yield timber management in matrix anywhere. There's just not enough to make it worthwhile. So what are the measurable stand scale goals for restoring old growth forest? Old growth has really big live trees and live and dead trees, but how many? What else is important in old growth forest habitat? And can I do anything about early xeral habitat while restoring old growth forest habitats? So down at the tree and patch scale, old growth has giant old trees. That's the most diagnostic feature of old growth. I think after you talk about that, definitions of old growth can kind of go all directions depending on which species you're really talking about. But they have very large cavities and large limbs. Hopefully they have spotted owls in them. I don't know if that shows much, but this is a side cavity. That's a juvenile spotted owl. And here's mom kind of guarding from the porch. And also a desired condition in old growth is marbled murrelets. Marbled murrelets need very large limbs to nest on. And most of the trees that murrelets nest in have DBHs around 80 or 90 inches. They're huge. Another characteristic of old growth forests that in my experience, has been includes grasses, forbs, shrubs, and smaller trees. Most of my experience with old growth forests has been chasing spotted owls around, and they'll lead you to their nest tree. But in Gold Beach Ranger District, where I was doing most of that, and every one of those owl nests were in an old growth stand. The stand might be 4 acres, it might be 100 acres, but they tend to need at least 55-inch diameter trees to be nesting in. And in chasing around in those stands, there were always a lot of hardwood trees present. Down in southern Oregon, that's quite often evergreen hardwoods. So what I've done here is found the few old growth stands that are on my district. There was very little old growth forest before we started clear cutting, mostly because of the equinifire probably in 1850. So I found old growth stands, and that's what this one is. This is the Pond Trail. These trees are well over 300 years old. There's a lot of 8 to 12-foot diameter trees in here. What I want you to pay attention to is the lighter green color. Let's see if I can get this thing. So the old growth stand is roughly around here. There's a lot of early xeral mixed in between here. Some of this is a creek. I think this is a recent slide. But the point of this slide and this slide is the amount of early cereal that's juxtaposed in between these really large trees. That orange polygon there is 1 acre. So in this particular spot, there's about there's 8 trees per acre, old growth trees per acre there. And in between those trees, there's probably some hardwoods that we can't see because of the shadows, but you can see early cereal juxtaposed between these large diameter trees. It's the same 1 acre polygon. This isn't a really good representation of old growth. It's kind of a riparian strip that didn't get clear cut, I think, when this was cut. But point here is this is 60 to 80 trees per acre in a commercial thinning within a year or two of it being treated, I think. Mature forest, which is what the majority of the natural forests on this isla are, mature forests. They're 160 to 170 years old. So it's just, I guess the main point here is look at the size of the crowns. Old growth has really huge crowns. And another thing I do to look at how to develop prescriptions for restoration is to look at some of the older thinning projects. This is a study, this is the cataract thinning site, but the original study was a Siuslaw thinning and understory for diversity study. Anyway, the main point here is there's early cereal forest showing up between these trees for now, and the crowns are pretty large, but this is thin to 30 trees per acre. It's another example of this unit was thin to 40 trees per acre. This was a meadow clear around there that's just encroaching with alders because it's not been maintained since it was created. This is a road right here. It's real steep down to here, and then it's pretty flat on the bottom, and probably coho habitat over here. But anyway, in burning the area to grow the meadow, it got pretty hot and thinned the trees out here. So I guess the point again here is there's kind of a old growth looking texture to that. Okay, the long-term desired condition for old growth is about 10 overstory conifer trees per acre, about 5 to 10 large dead trees per acre, with a diverse understory and hardwood trees. So short-term desired condition for old growth is to have enough conifers and hardwood trees to make it to old growth condition and develop large limbs and cavities, as well as some other considerations. So I've gotten to the key characteristics I'm looking for in old growth, but there's other considerations I got to include when we're developing prescriptions. One is to protect nesting northern spotted owls, marbled murrelets, and bald eagles during implementation. Try to avoid removal or degradation of northern spotted owl or marbled murrelet habitat. If we stay in stands younger than 80 years old, then we're not in murrelet habitat. And if we maintain at least 40% canopy cover, that'll maintain dispersal habitat for spotted owls. So that kind of minimizes adverse effects to them. We want to develop nesting structure for northern spotted owls and marbled murrelets. Those are really big trees, which need a lot of room. I think there also might be an opportunity to increase the amount of food available to northern spotted owls because two of the critters they like to eat the most are northern flying squirrels and wood rats. Flying squirrels, big leaf maple is important to them, and tree cavities. And wood rats are associated with shrubs and hardwood trees. There's other species found in spotted owl diets that are associated with early cereal. Another consideration for prescriptions is providing for the needs of species associated with dead wood, maintaining viability of species associated with grasses, forbs, shrubs, and hardwood habitats. One of the questions I got to ask myself when I first started working on the Central Coast Ranger District, and looking at some of those commercial thinning studies that had thinned down to 30 trees per acre, because that really changed the way I was looking at what commercial thinning ought to be like for wildlife. But anyway, one of the questions is, when are these different densities going to close canopy? So I've argued to maintain hardwoods and shrubs in these stands, because you take 150 trees per acre and thin it to 100, you're going to have an early cirro response for a while. But what's the right level to thin it to? Well, if you thin to 60 Doug fir per acre, you're going to be at 100% canopy cover on those trees that are about 20 to 25 inches in diameter. So even if you only got one objective is to grow big trees faster, 60 trees per acre is leaving way too many trees, unless you're planning to be in at the right time to keep them growing. Even 40 trees per acre, they're going to close canopy at about 30 to 35 inches DBH. Now, by then, maybe they're tall enough, depending on how deep the crowns are. But anyway, when they close canopy, they're going to start losing crown, so there'll be more side lights. So there's always a little more early cirral habitat under a taller stand. But it's not going to be maintaining any hardwood trees we're trying to grow in between the conifers. And when you get to those high canopy closures, whatever large limb development you've been getting out of some of these more open-grown trees, those limbs are going to start dying because everybody's fighting for the light as they're growing taller. So the last thing I look at when I'm looking at my prescriptions for wildlife is all the other goals the Forest Service has. And these are the major ones that come to mind. I think you guys can read it, but it's maintaining viability of fish and plant species and providing recreation opportunities with fish and wildlife, plants, protect water quality, provide economic, especially timber, as well as recreation opportunities for people. That stuff's straight out of the Forest Service manual, which is really basically straight out of the laws that are used to create the Forest Service and guide what we're supposed to do. So all the stuff I've been talking about so far kind of summarizes to these are the short-term desired conditions in the commercial thinning units. An important consideration is to produce economically viable timber sales, because without those timber sales, there's not much wildlife habitat management going on the forest I work on. My wildlife budget is way too small to be doing projects with it. So now we're getting to the prescriptions that we do. Basically, I have 3 prescriptions: heavy, moderate, and light. And I got to define what those are. But heavy, I usually don't go below 40 trees per acre in retention. Moderate is 50 to 60 trees per acre. And a light thinning, we're leaving 70 trees or more. Basically, those prescriptions are applied mostly based on whether there's going to be a road there next time we come back to enter, or the age of the stands. Another important aspect of the prescription is to release some trees so we have really open-grown trees, and maybe potentially we'll grow some really large limbs like are on this tree. This limb's at least 3 feet in diameter. Got the same release thing with big leaf maple. This tree happens to be, there's a creek behind over here, and all these little conifers are beginning to take a lot of the light. This limb looks pretty dead to me. These trees are probably going to stay here for the reasons John was just talking about. There's coho habitat within about 40 feet of these trees. Another prescription is to create canopy gaps. They're 1/4 to 1 acre in size. And this example was a gap created by during harvest. And then about a year previous to the photo, I had some downwood and some tree topping done and expanded the size of that. I think this unit was thinned maybe 4 years before the photo was taken. Try to create some small meadows within, and all that really is a gap that we seed. In LSR, we don't make these gaps any bigger than 1 acre. I think if we thin fairly heavy and make some gaps and then underburn and seed with native grasses, we'll have some grasses there for a while. But like others have mentioned today, these canopies are going to close real fast, and that's definitely transitory meadow. Here's an example of a meadow created. Well, the opening was created and then it was seeded. This is 60 trees per acre over on this side. This is an example of seeding just the temporary road used to harvest this unit without any underburning, and seeded with native grasses. And the last prescription part of the element that we include in our prescription is creating snags and downwood and promoting cavity development. I concentrate that dead wood into clumps. I think that's a higher value for the animals that use dead wood, and it also creates an opportunity to make a little more opening, a little more variability in the stand for light. So I think high-quality old growth contains early cereal habitat elements, and it's easy to justify and create small patches of early cereal habitat in young stands if desired condition is old growth forest. But it'll not be easy to maintain early cereal forest over time because the conifers are going to grow, and the radial growth on their crowns is rapid enough that most of what the district's done recently is only going to persist for maybe 10 or 15 years. And once these stands are over 80 years old, at least under the Northwest Forest Plan, we can't go back in and treat them again. I think it's been pointed out a number of times today that periodic disturbance is what's going to be required to maintain early cereal habitats over time. I think I'll just end it right there. Thank you.
We have about time for one or two questions for Randy or John. Tim?
I'm a silviculturist and I work on the land, so things might be a little bit different than forest work. I couldn't agree with you more about if your objective is to have big trees with diverse crowns, probably 60 trees is something that we need. Yet you said there's a constraint about 40% canopy closure. From my experience, you go down to 60 trees, you don't have anywhere near 40%. Are you looking down on the landscape or on the stand?
Well, we basically assume that if we've got 40 trees per acre is 40% canopy cover. That's not true right after treatment, but the crowns expand so fast, it kind of makes life a lot simpler that way. Because that one example I showed them the aerial view of the meadow created, and then I said 60 trees per acre. That wasn't 40% canopy cover. Those were just really spindly little crowns before we got to that stand to thin it. So anyway, yeah, that's what it is.
One last question.
Yeah, I have a question for John. I thought one of your charts showed the effects of thinning on growing big trees and or dead wood, trees faster, therefore we're growing big wood faster, and there's a benefit for in-stream wood input or large snags or whatever your dead wood value is. But when people are running the stand simulation models, they're finding out that we're capturing so much mortality through thinning that we're actually limiting the amount of dead wood that we can input to streams or the number of large snags that we can recruit. So I thought either I misunderstood your slide or there's something I'm missing here.
Okay, the slide really was specific to how much large wood, how big the tree would grow and how fast it would grow. And really, it didn't get into whether or not that tree would fall into the creek and provide large wood or not. Even the orange dots were showing the potential for a tree to grow large enough to even provide small wood. So the component that was missing was the probability of that tree to fall into the creek, either large or small, and provide large wood. So that really wasn't covered in that slide.